Okay, welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Audrey Lichter, the Executive Director of Chai Mitzvah, the Resource Center for Jewish Engagement. Today's Scholars Circle topic is a live briefing on campus anti-Semitism featuring Dr. Andrew Pessin. Chai Mitzvah is a national organization now celebrating its 16th year. We are the sponsors of Scholars Circle and a Jewish resource center that focuses on building community through Jewish engagement programs. We have over 20 curricula tailored for small group conversation for teens and adults that can be lay or professionally led. For more information, please visit our website at chaimitzvah.org. The Scholar Circle program was inspired by Scott Shea, our founder and board president, who authored a best-selling book, Conspiracy U, A Case Study, which unpacks anti-Zionist conspiracy theories from the left and the right political spectrum. The curriculum was also taught by and recorded in a series by Dr. Andrew Pessin, which is on our website as well. The Scholar Circle program hosts lectures by prominent scholars every 2 weeks on topics relating to Israel and the Jewish community, geared towards rabbis, educators, and lay leaders who are charged with explaining the complex issues the Jewish community is facing. To that end, each lecture will have a resource guide that will be sent to you after the lecture. A recording of each lecture will be accessible on our website and shared with you through email. We are excited to continue the Scholar Circle and thank you for those who have supported us. We have engaged over 3,000 participants since 10/7, and your donation enables us to continue bringing international scholars to you at no charge to share their expertise on the evolving Jewish world in the aftermath of October 7th. So thank you for those who have already contributed. To make a donation, you can go to our website and press the gold menu tab, Scholar Circle, and select Support Scholar Circle. This will also be included in the follow-up email. The program's recording will be sent to you in a few days and also available on our website, as well as all other lectures that we've done since we began almost a year and a half ago. Dr. Andrew Pessin is a professor of philosophy and Jewish studies at Connecticut College and former campus bureau editor of the Allgemeiner. His many books include Anti-Zionism on Campus, Poisoning the Wells, Antisemitism in Contemporary America, and the Jewish God Question, as well as several novels. One recent novel is Bright College Years, published in 2024 by Open Books. Long ago, he enjoyed some moments of fame portraying the genius on the David Letterman show. Tonight we have a different format than we've had in the past. It's going to be more of a conversation between myself and Dr. Pessin. So we still welcome your comments and questions. Please don't hesitate. And we'll be having a more relaxed and just dialogue between the two of us tonight.
No tie. I didn't wear a tie tonight, so.
So Dr. Pessin, welcome to Scholar Circle.
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you to Chai Mitzvah and Scholar Circle, which has given me wonderful opportunities to share thoughts on a number of related topics over the past year and a half. And I guess tonight I have to think on my feet a little bit more because it'll be free format, freewheeling. And I certainly look forward to questions from the audience.
Great. So let's begin by you sharing some personal information about how you became involved in researching and speaking about campus anti-Semitism and how that connects to your experience at Connecticut College.
That's a good question. You know, the historian Gil Troy talks about the idea of a Herzl moment. Everyone has their own Herzl moment. Herzl, of course, is the founder of modern political Zionism at the end of the 19th century, and his Herzl moment was the Dreyfus trial, at least according to the lore. He saw how badly Dreyfus and the Jews were being treated in France, and he understood in that moment that anti-Semitism was insuperable and therefore Zionism was necessary. So the Herzl moment is the moment when you suddenly see the problem is there and it's big and it's important. So my own Herzl moment came from my own experience, as you were mentioning, personal question. About 10 years ago, I was live blogging the 2014 war between Hamas, Gaza, and Israel, which, of course, in retrospect now seems so tame and small, but seemed quite large at the time. And in the course of that blogging, really day after day after day, lots and lots of posts, there was one post in which I compared basically the situation in Gaza to a person who is caging a rabid dog because of the unstoppable threat of violence that the dog poses to him, and the whole world sees the dog barking angrily and says, "Of course he's barking angrily because he's caged." And the analogy, of course, was to Hamas, namely posing this terrible threat to Israel and Israel instituting a blockade. So it was a meant to be an image. And as I said at the time, if I could draw, I would have drawn a cartoon. It would have been a political cartoon responding to the many people in the world who were condemning Israel for putting a blockade on Hamas. And I was pointing out the blockade is on Hamas because of the threat that Hamas poses. Anyway, that particular Facebook post months later was pulled out of context by various people, and it was claimed that I was a racist against all Palestinians, even though it was quite clear that Hamas was the analogy in the rabid dog. And what I saw, it generated literally an international death threat generating campaign. Our kids' school had to like, put on extra security. It only takes one crazy, as we see from today's tragic shooting of Charlie Kirk. Just takes one person to decide it's his day to be the hero. And so we essentially were in hiding for many, many months. And what I realized from that was my standing up to defend the right of the Jews to defend themselves was being portrayed as racist. And that's the moment that, as I say, that I understood that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It was a dreadful experience. Eventually, I emerged from it. And largely because of the support I got from lots of people around the world, there was a change.org petition made in my behalf, and it went around the world a few times, and it got over 10,000 signatures. And that's when I realized that although I was very alone where I was, there were thousands of people, many Jews, also many not Jews, who saw the injustice of this whole situation. And I realized, I, you know, I was put there for a reason, not to get theological, but that what I needed to do was stand up and fight. And so, in that time, since that time, I've become my scholarship and my teaching have moved into Jewish and Zionist areas, and I worked for the Allgemeiner for many, many years, being the campus bureau editor, tracking the campus scene. I published a bunch of stuff about campus anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and it's my way of doing battle and standing up for the Jews and speaking up for the Jews, at least in my neck of the woods, and with the skills that I have as a professor. So it was that personal experience of being attacked and condemned for standing up for the rights of Jews to defend themselves. That was my Herzl moment and turned me into the activist to the degree that I am.
Wow. I would imagine that there are quite a number of people who have had their Herzl moment since October 7th.
Well, October 7th for about 20 minutes, I thought, well, finally I'm vindicated because look what happens when you take down the fence protecting the person from the rabid dog. It goes for the throat of every person. And I was actually expecting for about 20 minutes, like a mass of apologies, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, those did not come. And then within 20 minutes, it was clear that large parts of the world and large parts of many college campuses were rooting for Hamas, right? And so no sympathy was to be had there. But I do agree with you. I think for many people, October 7th was it was a collective Herzl moment for the Jewish community at large.
Right. Um, so before we take a deeper dive into what has energized you these past 10 years, let's define campus anti-Semitism today. And those of us who lived through the 60s and 70s and know that campuses are many times have been the hotbed of anti-government and idealistic and very adamant. Remember protesting the Vietnam War and feeling extremely self-righteous that we were right. So how is what's happened today on campus different than normal campus activism? And how is it different from criticism of Israel?
Those are two enormous questions. So I will have to think on my feet on both of them. So in terms of, it's uh, I've been sounding the alarm for 10 years, right? Since it happened to me, I've been watching what's going on campuses. It's been clear to me that this hostility to Israel on campuses is it's a form of polite anti-Semitism. It's not cool to say you hate Jews, but it's very cool to say you hate Zionists, and that allows you to express this hatred for many people, allows them to express this hatred in a socially acceptable way. You're actually a very good person and a decent person in your opposition to these evil Zionists. And I've been seeing this trajectory, documenting and analyzing it along the way as I've been writing on it over the last 10 years and seeing the situation get worse and worse and more extreme and scarier. So, what I say about October 7th was it actually wasn't a surprise, and not just October 7th, but the campus's response. Large scale campus response to October 7th. It actually wasn't a surprise to me because it was literally the next logical step in the trajectory that I have been documenting and analyzing for 10 years. It was still, of course, horrifically shocking to see it come to fruition, but it wasn't surprising. That's exactly where the trajectory has been. And indeed, I just published a couple of books sort of collecting my writings over the last 10 years. Israel Breathes, World Condemns is the title, available on Amazon. And when I look back over these writings, it really is documenting and analyzing this
Mhm.
trajectory. And so along the way, plenty of people were pretty comfortable dismissing it. And there were times I felt like, it's just kids protests.
Mhm.
I had a friend of mine tell me in college they had a huge protest. They protested the single ply toilet paper. It was very bad toilet paper, and they like occupied a building and they succeeded. They got double two ply, right? Like this is what college kids do. And it's easy for especially people who aren't following too close. You hear about an occasional incident. I'm talking about prior to October 7th. It's college kids. It doesn't matter. They'll grow up. They'll grow out of it, etc. But I could see it was different all along. Um, uh, Not least in the incredibly sustained focus on this one issue, right? College kids can move. There's a bunch of things they care about, a bunch of things they want to protest. And even today, they occasionally find room to protest something else other than Israel. But when you look at the proportion of their time spent on this, not just protesting, when you actually examine qualitatively the nature of this movement over the last 10 years, it's just filled with hate. It's one thing to be excited in the positive sense, high energy. Maybe you really care about climate change and it's really, really important to you. And maybe you're even, you hate the industrialists for polluting the world, but you don't see the quantity and quality of hate that these anti-Israel campaigns over the past 10 years have been displaying. And it's this single-minded focus. It is the most protested thing. So it's been pretty clear to me that the anti-Israel movement on campuses is a different type of thing than many other traditional, typical things. And I, for some years, have been saying, I don't think we should dismiss this. I think we need to be paying attention to it. It's uh, a second important different consideration. It's really systemic, to use a very trendy word from critical race theory. There's systems being established to develop and promote and expand this protest slash hate movement. It's not just, okay, here's some kids and this is their issue du jour, and then they'll move on to some other issue. There are systems in place to grow this movement, produce these students, and then because it's actually been going on, depending where you want to count, I would start it about 20 years ago, really, on
Mhm.
Western campuses. They've now graduated multiple generations of students. It's no longer just on campus, and there's no longer any reason to think that these kids will graduate and grow up and get a job and then they'll move on to real life or something like that. They've now moved into really what I call the infosphere, the dominant infosphere, and it's the media and journalism and the legal profession, and they're actually in corporate America, and they're certainly in politics. They're all over the place now. And so that's really different from any other kind of traditional college protest. And the last thing I'll say, just, Vietnam, people compare it to that because, there were sit-ins and occupations and things like that. But, Vietnam, you could at least understand many of the students were protesting because they themselves could be sent over to Vietnam. It was very personal and they had a clear stake in that issue. And it's very understandable when they get worked up about it. But the reality is, and people will argue otherwise. But, Israel is this tiny little country, half a world away, and the large majority of people on campus do not have a personal stake in it. And so it makes you wonder what motivates these powerful, enormous, hate-filled protests about this thing that's far, far away, which by every objective measure is one of the smaller conflicts and problems in the world. The world is filled with larger players doing far more horrific things than anything they allege against Israel. And yet we have this single-minded, obsessive focus on this little place that's far, far away that very few people have a personal stake in. So that makes me suspect the deeper, sinister nature of this movement and
So,
program. And I think that was the first question.
right. Well, now I recall how I met you many years ago because Scott wrote this book, Conspiracy U,
That's right.
and he published that book a few years before October 7th.
Right.
And people called him an alarmist. And he was talking about the left and the right conspiracy theories on the campus.
Right.
And and you reached out to us at that point, and
That's right.
that's how we met you. But so he really also traces a lot of this to money from Qatar that went into universities that changed the campus, that changed the Middle Eastern Studies departments, the kinds
That's right.
the kinds of learning that the kids were doing. So let's drill down a little bit more because I think you
Okay.
touched on something that is really important for us to explore. If it is different than a normal campus protest, what's fueling it? I mean, you say that there's this hatred. Where is it coming from? Is it coming from? I mean, a lot of these are Jewish students that are.
Right.
So let's dig down a little bit deeper into that.
Okay. I wouldn't say a lot of them are. There's certainly plenty, and in my view, too many Jewish students who participate in these anti-Israel movements. But still the large majority of the movements are not the Jewish students. They, in the
Mhm.
Jewish community, they obviously this group stands out, and so we see them very large in our view. But the majority is not the Jewish students. So it's another enormous, wonderful question, and I didn't answer your second question earlier, but we can try to come back to anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism if the mood is right. So one of the things I admire so much about Scott Shea was seeing early on, people called him an alarmist. I understood that he saw what was happening, right? And that he was very aware of the conspiratorial nature. Basically, right-wing anti-Semitism and left-wing anti-Semitism both amount to these what really truly are conspiracy theories. I thought that was an incredible insight. And he was aware early on of the role of Qatar because, of course, his primary focus is his alma mater, which is Northwestern University, much in the hot seat over the last couple of years for those who follow the campus news, and indeed much in the news this past week as the president resigned, presumably partly from the pressure and stress of what I would say was his very poor handling of the campus anti-Israel, anti-Semitism movement there. But Northwestern stands out because they've received, was it billions from Qatar? Something on the order of magnitude, like, billions. They have a whole campus in Qatar, Northwestern in Qatar. And the president just resigned, but the new president they are bringing back a previous president, the one who saw the whole connection to Qatar and was pushing for that connection and took all that money and even serves on the board of some Qatar
Mm,
foundations, i.e., looks to me like a person who's in the pocket of Qatar.
mm,
And anyone who follows this closely knows that's very problematic. That Qatar in general for those who care about these issues, is a malign agent, and it has been buying schools and departments and politicians. And I just saw a statistic, I don't know if it's true, that Qatar owns more of London than the royal family owns of London now, in terms of property in London.
mm,
And so one important stream and source at fueling this is unquestionably this, not just Qatar, but it's Arab money in general that's been coming into a number of major universities. Columbia, Brown, and of course Georgetown are also significant recipients of this money. And as Audrey, you pointed out, and I think that was, following from my comment about the systemic nature of this, you have in a number of major universities, they're either Middle East Studies departments. At Columbia, it's Center for Palestine Studies that are funded by these agents, and they bring in professors who teach lots of students, and they are very activist in addition to their scholarship. And it certainly puts the kosher stamp on this movement when there are academic centers at major institutions that are pushing these narratives, and they're very influential to students. So that's a very important stream. I also shout out to ISGAP, which is the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. They've also done a lot of work researching and revealing the billions of dollars of Arab money that has come into these departments. And make no mistake, money corrupts people, right? So even if you have a professor who starts off as a pure scholar and may not start off anti-Israel, but if his endowed chair is dependent on this money from Qatar, he's going to be a lot more inclined to say favorable things about Qatar, not least because, as actually just came out this week too, the Northwestern president, when he testified behind closed doors in Congress last month, that testimony has now come out. And what became acknowledged was Qatar actually, it's against the law in Qatar to criticize the government of Qatar. And Northwestern had to follow the Qatar laws. So Northwestern professors cannot criticize the government of Qatar. There you
Yeah.
go. That's clearly a problem for scholarship. And in addition, these endowed chairs end up funding often very foreign scholars who are just, steeped in
Mhm.
anti-Israel sentiment. So
Mhm.
that's a very important source. It's coming to light now. People are becoming more aware of it, and hopefully there'll be pushback against it. And
Mhm.
that sets up a foundation that produces streams of anti-Israel students. There's more. Should I keep going on that, or do you?
Well,
We've
well,
identified one significant
yeah,
stream that
yeah,
fuels the movement, but
yeah. What else? What else do
what
you?
else? So I would say, and I saw this pretty clearly as I was putting these two books together, collecting my writings over the last 10 years. It's really a perfect storm of two other movements plus the fuel. So the money is like the gas on the fire that was these two other movements produced. And the two movements, most listeners will be familiar with. It's the BDS/SJP movement. So SJP is Students for Justice in Palestine, a campus group that is the primary driver of anti-Israel activism on campus. They started out a little over 20 years ago with a few chapters. Now they say they've got 300 chapters in North America, meaning on 300 different campuses. And they are the primary drivers of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement against Israel, the whole anti-Israel program. They started small 20 years ago and have just been growing, 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 growing. And what they do is bring all sorts of, I would call it propaganda. Their material is often filled with lies, misrepresentations, omissions of context, etc. But they are the ones that just keep painting this incredibly negative picture of Israel on these
Who's
campuses.
funding them?
What
For SJP,
that's
who's funding them?
that's a good question. People have been trying to research it. Their books are not open. There is certainly some discussion and speculation that groups like American Muslims for Palestine, which was founded by a UC Berkeley lecturer, Hazem Batyan, who also founded SJP, in fact, and AMP has connections to these networks that were indicted for funneling money to Hamas. So, I don't think there's hard evidence or a straight line from, let's say, Hamas to SJP,
Okay.
but there are these networks that are interlinked, and it is clear that SJP gets substantial money from some sources because the national SJP runs these coordinated campaigns, and they have, for example, they brought what they call Israel Apartheid Week to campuses, and they've been on many, many campuses. And this is a series of events. It's usually a week long. They'll set up a mock apartheid wall, as they call it. We would call it the security barrier, typically in the middle of the quad. I don't know how or why they're permitted to do this on these campuses, but in the middle of the central part of campus, it'll be like five large walls covered with posters filled with, of course, lies, misrepresentations, omissions, etc., etc. And they'll have all sorts of events that week. They'll have speakers and films and some cultural events. And typically, that introduces or paves the way to a BDS vote in a student government, right? They try to get the student government to adopt BDS in various forms, but they will literally spend Israel Apartheid Week is always in the spring, usually March. They'll spend the entire academic year bringing speakers and films and putting on events, etc. And then it culminates in the Israel Apartheid Week with the mock apartheid wall and the BDS vote. And they do this year after year on some campuses. And sometimes those BDS votes fail, and then they fail again the next year, but they keep coming, and then eventually they pass, right? And so we've had this movement for 20 years that's just been growing, 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 fertilizing the soil. And I think, those who are inclined to be dismissive of the problem will say things not untrue, that the large majority of college students at these major campuses, excuse me, don't give a shit, right? It's not their issue. They don't care. But, and it's a small number of very loud people that get all the attention. But what happens is even these ones who don't care, they are just their environment is dominated by this anti-Israel stuff, and they walk away. They're not going to like maybe read the posters too carefully, but they walk away thinking, "Oh, Israel's pretty evil. Whatever is, Israel's really evil. Those are really bad people over there." So, so you've got the nucleus, which is hot and loud, and then they bring in a bunch of people who join them that are a little bit more peripheral, and then the rest of the campus absorbs it, right? And so I think that's the first major movement, and it clearly has external funding because these apartheid walls, they're often very sophisticated art installations, and they travel to different campuses, and they appear simultaneously. So someone's paying for all that, right? And they bring all these speakers, and officially as a student group, I think their money is supposed to only come from, university funds, like student governments distribute funds to different clubs. But they bring in so many speakers, and speakers charge money. And if they're traveling, he has hotels and airplanes and things like that. So there's clearly external sources of funding that are fueling this movement.
So that's
Qatar, I don't know if you could draw a straight line from
that.
Qatar, but Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood is connected to all these other organizations. So it's at least
That's
plausible
very
the money's flowing.
well orchestrated and long-term kind of campaign.
And in fact, on that subject, and then I'll give you the second movement that
Uh-huh.
so don't let me get too sidetracked. But this was done nicely. There's several movies now about October 7th and the impact on campuses, and I've only seen fully one of them. I think it was called October 8th. I recommend people see it. It only has a little bit of just horrible, violence at the very beginning, but it's really about how campuses reacted, and I think it was overall very well done. And they remind folks that in the early 1990s, I think it was the FBI was wiretapping a meeting of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, where they were essentially laying out their plan to, and the word they would use is jihad. Jihad can mean, violent resistance, terror, but jihad is any form of the fight to spread Islam. And they weren't going to conquer America by their armies. That was not on the table. But they were going to conquer America for Islam through soft power and soft targets in particular campuses. So they literally have a wiretapping of them hatching this plan to develop campus activism for Palestine, which is the front line of the movement to spread Islam, right? And the reason Palestine is a useful thing to them is and in this meeting they say we're going to frame it in the language of like human rights and social justice, which was already becoming big and popular on campuses as early as the 1990s. If we frame the Palestine issue as a human rights, social justice issue, we'll get all these college students on board and they'll be introduced to Islam, right? So like literally have this. And then when you look at the next 30 years, a few years later, SJP is formed, right? And SJP spreads campus to campus. And it's literally the playbook. And they're doing exactly what they said they would do. And they have been successful, I think, by any metric, very successful. So that's one significant movement, the SJP/BDS movement. And then the other one's a little bit more recent, at least in its intensity, and it goes by a number of names. We can call it wokeism, we can call it critical race theory, social justice activism. I'll just say progressivism as an umbrella term, and it's a big term. There's lots of different things under it, but let's just call it progressivism. The very left wing, very activist ideology, which is really dominant on most major campuses. Um, I keep saying major campuses. There were something like 4,000 accredited institutions of higher education in North America a few years back. Places are now folding and merging. That number, I'm sure, is smaller. The large majority of these campuses are quiet. These issues aren't present
Mhm.
on them, but it's the well-known ones, the prestigious ones, the major state universities, the Ivies, the universities of Michigan, University of Chicago, UCLA, right? And it's really all the schools that attract significant numbers of Jews is where you see all these problems, which tells you something. These problems are targeting not merely Israel, this place and far, far away, but it's really targeting the Jews who are on campuses. And again, the evidence for that is I think someone did a study. Basically, the more Jews there were on a campus, like Jewish students and faculty, the more anti-Israel events there were, right? And so where there's no Jews, there's almost no anti-Israel events. In any case, progressivism, without going into details about it, I think one of my Scholar Circle lectures was about it, last year sometime. But this ideology of progressivism says a lot of things, but it's not good for the Jews. Basically, to put it in three sentences, progressivism sees the world as divided into oppressors and oppressed. It sees race as the most important category there. So white oppresses people of color, but it essentially equates success, and let's call it economic success amongst other forms of success. Success and power are understood as forms of oppression. That's simplified, but that's the basic idea. Because Jews on average are successful, and by the way, there's many Jews who are not successful. There's many poor Jews. There's many Jews who are losers who don't make it, right? But Jews are represented disproportionately in some well-known fields, whether that is finance or academia and Nobel Prizes, right? Things like that. So because Jews are successful and success is oppressor, Jews are seen as oppressors, right? And oppressors ultimately of all marginalized people, including people of color. So if that's the dominant view, that view is so profoundly anti-Semitic, inarguably, in my view, inarguably anti-Semitic. And so you have the anti-Zionism of SJP and BDS, which we all know is filled with so much hatred because it's the Jews who are the alleged perpetrators in Israel. Israel is the Jewish state, but at least they can say we're against, a political movement or a government or something like that. We all know better. You now have that literally being synthesized with the view that, generally speaking, even American Jews are racist oppressors. And so the next thing you know, Israeli Jews are white supremacist, Jewish supremacist oppressors of marginalized Palestinian people of color. So you have the same categories used here, and it merges. And the one common thread is, of course, the Jew is evil. Jews are evil, right? So that's our campuses, right? You've got and then fueled by the professors who are funded by Qatar and other Arab money, you have this perfect storm of three major factors coming together over the last 10 years in particular. Like the progressivism really got powerful 10 years ago and of course exploded with the George Floyd thing,
Mhm.
episode 5 years ago, right? So three big factors coming together, and what you have, and it follows logically, if these worldviews are being synthesized and these are dominating the infosphere, Jews are the most evil people on the globe and have to be stopped. And there you go. You've just justified October 7th. You've just justified genocide against the Jews. And
Mm.
so on our campuses on October 8th, to this day, but definitely less frequently, happily,
Mm.
literally open calls for genocide of the Jews. That's what the Intifada is, right? That's what from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free means. And so we have these students able to say this because of this, in my view anyway, this is my understanding of things, this confluence of very scary factors.
Okay, I'm going to push back a little bit. I
Okay.
just want to make sure that we get some of the questions that are coming in.
Definitely.
And
Okay.
I know that last time there was a question about your emphasis on the left and on progressivism, and you
Right.
ignored or didn't even mention the right. So I want to ask you to deal with that a little bit. Right wing, kind of
Yeah.
neo-Nazi. What influence does that have? Does it have any bearing on the campus? Maybe it doesn't. But and there is a question here that I think goes to that by Brett Feldman, who says Israel was a liberal socialist cause in the beginning. When did that change?
Okay, I can give a good short answer to that one. Obviously, any really good answer should be longer. So let me do that one first. Um, I'll say two major things. Again, confluence of factors. The Soviet Union began its organized campaign of anti-Zionism in the 1960s, which of course fuels the left wing, like the left wing intelligentsia and academia look to the Soviet Union for guidance. And so the Soviet Union literally developed an organized, orchestrated anti-Zionist campaign. That's one thing. And then the Six-Day War in 1967, because what happened with the Six-Day War was, as the person I think rightly said, Israel was a liberal, it was a progressive cause. Most liberals and progressives saw it as a national liberation movement, right? The Jews were decolonizing the land of Israel from the colonialist oppressors who were the Arabs, as that's the language that was used, in those early decades. But after 1967, fueled by this incredible stream of propaganda from the Soviet Union, central to which is the protocols for the elders of Zion. I can elaborate if you like. This victory in the Six-Day War was so immense. Suddenly, Israel looked big and powerful, and it was. And with the essentially I won't say invention of the Palestinian identity, but the coming to the fore of the Palestinian identity that allowed the Soviet Union, and this was also orchestrated by the Soviet Union, to reframe the conflict. It's no longer Jews versus Arabs, because that conflict is, Arabs are enormous. There's millions and millions and millions of them, just a few Jews, and there's, the Arab world is 500 times the landmass of, Palestine or Israel. It's no longer Jews versus Arabs, which make Jews David to Arab Goliath. It now became Israelis versus Palestinians, and Israelis now look like the Goliath, and the Palestinians are the poor indigenous people oppressed by the colonialists. So that switch, 1967, I think, was the fuel that made that go down very smoothly for people. But it was this Soviet propaganda that reframed the conflict that I think moved the left. So I guess that wasn't as short as I thought that was going to be. I was going to just do three sentences. The right wing. Um, I am not one to dismiss the threat of the right wing. I actually think the right wing in America, anyway, has become significantly empowered because they've watched the left wing hatred of the Jews, which is how I understand it. Not everyone will agree, but that anti-Zionism is hatred of Jews, in my view. They've seen the left wing hatred of Jews just become normalized and acceptable. It's actually okay to hate the Jews. Like in it's mainstream now in so many different places. And so I think the right wing has become empowered. The reason I don't talk much about it is they're not really present on the major campuses. You do find episodes and incidents on other campuses occasionally, but left-wing progressivism is by far the dominant ideology on most of these major campuses. And that's therefore, in my view, the bigger threat and the bigger problem, at least in the campus scene, which is the one that I focus on. But I'm not overlooking the existence of right-wing Jew hatred and, the potential violence that could come from that direction as well.
Um, I want to circle back to the BDS for a moment.
Okay.
Um, from my understanding, a lot of these BDS resolutions happen, but the universities actually don't divest. So
Correct.
why is it, why do we care?
That's a great question. So until recently, I think until even the October 7th aftermath, um, no American university had listened to the BDS, and the BDS resolutions were passed, on at least a couple of hundred different campuses over the years. And some campuses they're passed every few years because they want to, each new student government wants to renew it. And in almost every single case, the university says, sorry, no, thank you, for many good reasons, academic and financial and otherwise. The reason it matters is that these activists No, they're not likely to persuade the university, but it does two things. The BDS campaign is a months-long campaign of inundating the campus with Israel hatred, right? And so what they know is they're playing the long game. They know they are building a movement. They know they're exposing so many students, even the ones who really don't care, just to the basic idea. If they walk away thinking Israel's evil, which, by the way, amounts to thinking Jews are evil because Israel is the Jewish state and everybody knows it, right? They feel they have success. So the goal, they would love it if the university said sure, but I don't think they ever realistically hope that that's what's going to happen. And of course, the second thing is they can now take the moral high ground here. They can say the university doesn't listen to us. They're silencing us, right? They become victims now because the university, and what they love to say now, is complicit in genocide, which is a very ludicrous thing to say, but they all say it on all these campuses. It's complicit in genocide, and it's not listening to its own students. They're rejecting democracy because they somehow think a university is a democracy, which is also ridiculous, right? It isn't. So um, I think they actually maybe even get more propaganda mileage from the university declining than they would get for the university accepting it, right? So that's why, that's why.
Mhm.
And some universities have now acted on it in various ways. Sometimes they'll deny its BDS. I don't know if I can give specific examples off the top of my head, but a couple of universities like stop their study abroad programs with, University of Haifa or Tel Aviv University, and just a normal reevaluation of their programs and things like that. But these are universities where there's BDS pressure, so they can comply with BDS, but deny it, plausible deniability. It's not BDS that we, did this, and so forth. So that's happening. And some European universities have openly just endorsed BDS. The University of Utrecht just this past week, for example. Um, so, yeah.
Mhm. Um, Keeping on the right wing, here's a
Okay.
question. There is also a conflation between the anti-Trump protesters and the pro-Palestinian anti-Semitic protesters. Note that when Trump went to dinner in D.C. last night, the chant he heard was "Free D.C., Free Palestine, Trump is the Hitler of our time." The anti-Trump, anti-right sentiment thus spills over into anti-Semitism. This makes it more difficult for those who object to the MAGA agenda to fight against the rampant campus anti-Semitism. And a follow-up question is, what do you think of Trump administration's efforts to challenge anti-Semitism on the college campuses? So let's look at Trump a little bit. Where is
Oh,
he helpful? Is he hurtful? I
oh,
mean,
I'm being called. Sorry, gotta go. That's a minefield, and
yeah.
I think in these times, the single most important thing for the Jewish community is to remain unified to the degree that that's possible. Um, and, it's not fully possible. Anyway, there will be some who cannot be unified with the Jewish community, but nothing is more divisive than the Trump issue, right? This political issue right now. And so I'm going to cautiously, I think, avoid any substance in my answer because it's very hard to have these conversations, right? There are people who are as obsessed with hating Trump as other people are obsessed with hating Israel.
Mhm.
At some point, in my view, I'm a pretty calm, rational person. I'm a philosopher, PhD, right? So I have to be, I think you can have reasonable conversations, critical conversations of Israel and of Trump, but when these things get to the point of just obsessive hatred, I feel like something's gone too far somewhere. And again, with today's assassination, like this things are so scary right now. People are so charged with feelings. When you've got that hatred, violence follows, right? So it's divisive. I would hope, and I know actually, most of my friends, I grew up a member of the Democratic Party. I'm not ashamed to say I quit the party about a year and a half ago. I cannot be part of that party anymore. I'm an independent now. The party, in my view, has become so dominated by what I see as Jew hatred. And I understand people want to stay in the party to influence it and bring it back, and I admire those people, but it's not for me to. Um, but uh, I would like if we could have a rational conversation about looking at the various things the Trump administration has done and say, and assuming you're someone who cares about Jewish interests, the safety of Jews, if you care about the state of Israel, right? As I said, most of the people I know, I'm in this infosphere myself, lifelong Democrats, and the Zionists among them. I have several who are very good Zionists, really strong Zionists, but also lifelong Democrats. And this last election, boy, was it hard for them because they dislike Trump immensely. But in most cases, they recognize that his policies, his views, his administration was likely to be friendlier to Israel and Jewish interests than Harris's was. And they've made some good arguments back. I remember one of the arguments was Trump is unreliable. He'll go to the highest bidder. He's fickle. And those are legitimate concerns to raise, and so even if many of the policies look like they'd be more favorable, can you trust those policies so lots of those conversations. As I said, I'm not going to get into the substance. I would
Right.
hope that people could have a calm, rational discussion. What is unfortunate is that for many people, if Trump does it, it's bad. So even Jewish Zionists who, if Biden or Harris did that thing, they would be all supportive of it because it's good for the Jews or it's good for Israel or it's favorable to Israel. The sheer fact that Trump does it makes it unpalatable to them. And that to me, that's bad. That's not right. Like we have to, and this is Jewish unity, is recognizing at least if we're all on the same side, like, we're all Zionists, we believe that Israel is important.
Right.
Um, we have to recognize what's good for Israel, no matter who it comes from, whether it comes from the right or the left. And we have to recognize what's bad from it. If you're a Democrat, I hope you could recognize things that Kamala Harris said in some of her policies that I think were not good for Israel. They're clearly not good for Israel, in my view, at the time. So I don't know that enough people are capable of having those calm conversations, though. On that
Mm-hmm.
note, can I bring in a question? I know my last lecture, which I was talking about this new project I have, which is called Protocols of the Elders of Anti-Zion, the Global Conspiracy Against the Jews. And you mentioned Scott Shea's, insight that left-wing anti-Zionism is really a conspiracy theory against the Jews, and as is right-wing uh, traditional protocols of the elders of Zion. Anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. Uh, so I have this project, and I'm very actually excited. I think it's important, and I'm looking hard to find a home for it and support for it. So maybe we can talk about that some other day. But in response to that, a very insightful listener, I raised some questions that I guess didn't get a chance to get asked, but then he emailed me, and we had a little bit of back and forth, and I wanted to make sure that question, his concerns, and it's really relevant to what I was just saying here now. It's a little hard to summarize it precisely, but um, uh, uh, let me just read a couple of points from his email if I can. So he says, um, I'm concerned about a feeling I have that many Jews consider all Palestinians to be complicit in terrorism in the events of October 7th, so they can more easily avoid the horror of seeing starving people and deprivation of basic necessities, because after all, Hamas won't give up the hostages and the people have enabled Hamas. So he's partly concerned that I think the way I understand it, Jews are not living up to our high values. Collectively speaking, we have some important values, as Kamala Harris would say, right? Israel has the right to defend itself, but it matters how they defend themselves. That's how she put that point. And I think this is sort of similar to that. And it's also tied in with, as he says, that he's concerned about the many Jews who are critical of Israel and Israel's operations and behaviors in this war without being called part of an anti-Semitic conspiracy. So that's how it connected to my earlier thing when I was laying out these conspiracies against the Jews and against Israel. And he's defending really those Jews who, and I think the assumption is they're Zionists, right? If they're not Zionists, it's a different conversation, but they hold themselves and the Jewish people to high standards, and they've got lots of criticisms of Israel's operations in the war. And they do not it's not justified to call them anti-Semites or part of a conspiracy. So I don't know if I've represented it that well. And I think it's a very important point. And I know most of the Jews in my circles sort of fall into that category. They are left-leaning. Again, I'm largely like in an academic environment, and they're left-leaning. They sort of like progressivism, except for its hostility to the Jews. They believe that Israel has the right to exist, but they're not a big fan of the current government and maybe not a big fan of the way the current war is being prosecuted. So there's lots of these people. And like I said, I believe in Jewish unity. These people belong in the tent. If they're Zionists, they belong in the tent, in my view, and at least in my tent. And the point of view is a legitimate one and it's a fair one, so it should be addressed. So what what I would say in response, and I know we're getting short on time, and this should probably be maybe a whole Zoom on this topic, maybe, right? That's a thought. It's hard to generalize here, right? You have to go on a case by case basis. I do firmly believe that the same criticism made by one person could be anti-Semitic when made by that person, but not anti-Semitic when made by another person. That might sound a little odd, and I need more time to explain that. But uh, any particular criticism is not intrinsically or in itself anti-Semitic. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on who's levying the criticism and to what end, right? And so there are criticisms that I think if a Jewish Zionist makes it of Israel, that it's a legitimate criticism. But what happens is you have many other people, and again, you'd have to go case by case basis to evaluate individuals, but many other people whose agenda is the destruction of Israel will do anything they can and grab any tool they can to further the destruction of Israel, including these criticisms, right? So the criticism made, and it's the difference between a constructive criticism from someone who cares about something and wants to improve it and make it better, and a destructive criticism that aims to destroy. It can be the same criticism, right? And, my own view is, in private, in Jewish circles, if you're trying to influence Israeli policy, and by all means, if you have legitimate connections there, I don't know that it's American citizens' right to have a say in Israeli government decisions. Is that's Israelis' business ultimately, but of course, many Jews feel this connection, so that they want to have that say. They should talk to Israelis, I guess, is the way to do that. But if you have these criticisms, by all means, go to Israel, advocate, protest. I mean, right? Israel has these massive protests every week right now. It is a democracy. You're able to express it, try to influence and convince people, but do it, I'll put it inside the family, right? Do that to some large degree in private. It's the same thing. You might have criticisms of how, I don't know, your family operates or members of your family do, but then there's people outside your family who want to murder your family. When you go public with those criticisms, you are empowering the people who want to destroy your family, which is not your goal. By hypothesis, you care about this thing, you want to support it, you don't want to destroy it. So going public with those criticisms, or at least airing them in the wrong contexts, is inconsistent with your actual aims and really harmful. So those criticisms can well be anti-Semitic when voiced by the people who want to destroy the Jewish state, not anti-Semitic when voiced by Jewish Zionists who want to improve the Jewish state. But a lot depends on how and where and when you levy these criticisms. So, I know for me, the many Jewish Zionists I know, um, who belong in my tent, even when I disagree with them. I'm more comfortable defending a good number of Israeli practices in this war than others are. More people see it as critical. I accept those criticisms, and I hope we can have a respectful conversation over them. But I do believe they should be done. In private might be too strong, but in the right circles, so as not to empower the people who do not have benevolent motives and aren't interested in improving Israel, but in destroying it. So that's at least something I'd say there. So I'm not quick to call, Jewish critics of Israel anti-Semitic. I think in most cases they're not. They're not. but sometimes what they're saying is indistinguishable from what the anti-Semites are saying, and that's when things get thorny. So thank you
Um,
for giving me the opportunity to
yeah,
say at least a little
an
something on that
important
topic.
point. Important. It's an important distinction. I totally agree. Um, so we only have a few minutes left, and we always like to end with something positive. We always like to end with something, there's a lot of questions here. I'm sorry that I can't get to all of them. You always engender lots of dialogue, lots of questions, but so what the bottom line is, what can we do? What can students do on campus? What can faculty do on campus? Where are we at now? And what's a proactive approach in your mind to dealing with all of this on the campus?
Um, okay, let me first say I'm flattered that interest is engendered and people have questions. If you're interested, please follow me on social media. On X at Andrew Pessin, and I like to engage there. I have a Facebook group if you're on Facebook called Anti-Zionism on Campus. Please join that group. You can visit my website, andrewpessin.com. Please contact me through the website. That's an easy way to find me. And I'm always happy to engage. So if your question doesn't get asked tonight, which I guess it's not, I see at least 14 in the Q&A, please feel free to follow up. I will do my best to engage and etc. So, and then second thing I'll say is I have trouble finding positive things. It's as I like to say, my glass is two-thirds empty and leaking, but I'm not the most optimistic person. So my wife's trying to work on me to just, we try to say gratitudes every night just because she's a psychologist and actually thinking positive helps you feel positive and actually is good. So I'm working on that. If there's something positive, I'm more of a theoretical person than a practical person. I'm a philosopher after all, right? That's so. But if there's something positive in this, I think we have seen some just wonderful things from the younger generation. Our embattled college students in particular, so many of them have risen to the occasion. So many of them, yeah, yes, we talked earlier about the smaller group who disaffiliate and become anti-Zionists and are often very loud. But the large majority are doubling down on their Jewish identity and their Jewish pride and their standing up for Israel, and they're fighting back and they're using any mechanism they can. That includes the law. There's a number of lawsuits. They have certainly garnered publicity for what's going on their campuses, and they're speaking up on social media. And if there's hope and promise, it's that generation. I do feel this is another conversation for another time that established Jewish leadership has let us down in very, very big and deep ways. And that's also a factor in allowing this situation to reach the point. So I think what we're going to see, and dear God, let this war end soon, on good terms. I think we're going to see a real change in Jewish leader, like it's a turnover. I think the old guard has to go. We need new young people, like a Shabbos Kestenbaum. I'm sure listeners here will know who he is, a Harvard student who just has become a real activist and has got incredible talent for it. Um, they're going to take over, and that's good. So that's so what I guess I would say if there's a practical thing I would recommend, and this is a much longer conversation, but support the young people, support your students on campuses. The campus really is the front line for this battle. The campus is what's shaped these generations of students now who've moved off into the infosphere and are taking over. In my view, they've taken over the Democratic Party in a very frightening way, and which isn't to say there aren't some problems in the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party focused. Um, the campus is where that happened. It happened. They were radicalized in their campuses, right? And this is a time where it's possible to push back on some of the radical ideology of campuses, which does include the extreme versions of the progressivism and certainly the BDS SJP stuff. The students are the ones pushing back on that, so we need to support them. That means supporting the organizations that support them. That includes Stand With Us does a lot of wonderful work. Students Supporting Israel does a very different kind of, but also very, very important work. A shout out to the Academic Engagement Network, which focuses on supporting the faculty, who are also important because we are the few safeties, the Jewish, I'm the only faculty member on my campus who speaks up for Israel. And so the Zionist students find their way to me, right? And so AEN helps support them. So support those groups. clearly support Chai Mitzvah because they're trying to do the educational part of this, getting the word out about what the problem is and how to fix it through education, which is one of the avenues. So I guess that's what I would say. And I do have some hope in the younger generation, less so in my own
They're getting
generation.
an education that they weren't expecting, another kind of education.
That's
But
right.
thank you
Yeah.
so much. Such a wonderful conversation, and would definitely have you back again to continue
Happy to come back.
all the things we need to continue speaking about. So thank you so much, Dr. Pessin. Our
Thank
next
you.
Scholars Circle features Dr. Saltzman on perspectives on the Gaza War, politics, security, and society in Israel. The lecture will be on Thursday, September 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So we hope to see you all then, and thank you all for your conversation and for staying with us. And Dr. Pessin, thank you again for all your insight and all the work you do. You are one of our heroes.
Well, thank you to Chai Mitzvah and thank you to people for showing up. I really do appreciate that.
Good night, all.
Good night.